We're going to use this two-period model that has investment, consumption, and labor to study a couple of different topical issues. The first topic is about what the effects of an increase in government purchases today are likely to be. Going into recessions, it's often the case that governments will pass stimulus packages that often entail some increase in government purchases and perhaps some cut in taxes. In fact, in the last recession, there was quite a large stimulus package on the order of 5% of GDP initiated by the Obama administration. So we start with a reminder that in that one period model that we had, if you increase government spending, you have to finance it in that period. Higher taxes then are going to reduce consumers' income. This encourages consumers to increase labor supply, and that then increases output. Consumption, however, falls because the increase in output is less than the increase in government spending. And in that very simple model, we had that Y is equal to consumption plus government spending. Now we can address this question much more thoroughly. We're going to bring intertemporal effects into the picture. And those are extremely important because, for example, higher government spending is actually going to drive up the demand for goods today, and therefore it raises the relative price of goods today, that is, the interest rate. That induces consumption and investment to fall. So the crowding out that we saw up here of private consumption gets enhanced because we have now that consumption falls both for the wealth reasons and for the real interest rate reasons. There are also going to be supply side effects that come from the fact that higher real interest rates increase the price of current leisure, and that then encourages consumers to supply more labor. So all of this then has implications for the future, because if investment today falls, then the capital stock in the future will be lower, and so output would tend to be lower in the future. But right now, we're just going to focus on what the effects are today. So we're going to start with the simplest version, and this is the kind of analysis that you would see in a Principles of Macro textbook. And I'm going to do this with a specific numerical example, and you should work through this example on your own. So we're going to assume that consumption depends on current income. And what this says is that if income goes up by $1, then consumption goes up by 75 cents. So the marginal propensity to consume is 0.75. We're going to assume that investment is just equal to 10 units and it's independent of income, as it was in the previous videos. And government purchases is initially at a level of 20 units and rises to 35 units. So the increase in government purchases is 15. So once we have all of this information, we can figure out what current demand for goods is. And remember, it's going to be a function of the real interest rate, and it's just consumption demand plus investment demand plus government spending. So investment demand is 10, government spending is 20. So we have 30 plus consumption, which is 0.75 times income. And then after the increase in government purchases, this thing goes up by 15 units. So it becomes 45 plus 0.75 times Y. Now, what is equilibrium? Well, equilibrium is just going to be where supply equals demand. Now, to be consistent with what goes on in principles books, we're going to ignore two things, which we will then return to. But right now, we're going to ignore them. First, we're going to ignore the fact that higher government spending has to be financed through higher taxes. And second, we're going to set aside any effects that government spending has on real interest rates and therefore on consumption and investment. These simplifying assumptions, ignoring them in other words, are actually very much like the way that you see things dealt with in principals books, but also in the newspaper when you just read how business economists talk about the effects of government spending. Okay, so what we have then is government spending is going to go up by 15 units. Before this increase in government spending, we had that YD, meaning total demand for goods, is equal to 30 plus 0.75, but times Y, times income. But equilibrium is when YD equals Y. So we can just scoot this baby over here. And what do you get? You get 1 minus 0.75 Y equals 30. Divide through. And you'll notice that what is that? That's 1 minus the marginal propensity to consume. So the total level of income before the increase in government spending is 30 divided by 1 minus the marginal propensity to consume. And by the way, 1 minus the marginal propensity to consume is also called the marginal propensity to save, because if you don't consume your dollar, you save it. So we just calculate that and we get 30 divided by 0.25, and that's equal to 120. Now government spending goes up by 15 units. Now the equilibrium level of income is 45 divided by the marginal propensity to save. It's equal to 180. So what we've seen is that the 15 unit increase in government spending generates 60 units increase in GDP. So we can then calculate what's called the government spending multiplier, which is the change in output divided by the change in government spending. It's equal to 4, which, by the way, is just equal to 1 over 1 minus the marginal propensity to consume. So this multiplier tells you that if you get a $1 increase in government spending, how much of an increase do you get in GDP? And when the marginal propensity to consume is 0.75, the answer to that is 4. We can show all of this in this graph. Initially, we have that demand is given by CD1 plus ID plus G1. And the equilibrium, which is where current income equals current demand, is point A. So what you see here is that corresponds to the level of income 120 that we calculated before. Then government spending goes up by 15 units. And that's what this vertical distance is 15 units. And lo and behold, what happens is GDP rises by 60 units. It goes up to that 180 level that we calculated. To further understand this graph, let's just mark a few things. So this distance BD is the change in government spending. And the distance DE is the marginal propensity to consume times delta Y. AE, meanwhile, is the change in Y. So how can we understand this distance BE? Well, BE is going to be whatever the change in G was, government spending, plus this marginal propensity to consume times the change in output. And this, by the way, is also just the change in G plus the induced increase in consumption that comes from higher level of income. And all of this is equal to the change in income. So again, what we end up with is 1 minus the marginal propensity to consume times the change in income is equal to the change in government spending. And what you should notice is that because the marginal propensity to consume is always between 0 and 1, this multiplier, delta y over delta g, is always bigger than 1. So what that tells you is if you increase government spending by $1, or in this model, by 1 unit of goods, then GDP will go up by more than 1 unit of goods. And all of this is happening because the increase in government spending stimulates income, but then the higher income triggers higher consumption. And so what's going on here is that government is demanding more goods, and by demanding more goods, the government is inducing private consumers to also demand more goods. And that higher demand for goods ends up showing up as an increase in the supply and also in income.